we discussed on accrual accounting, okay, the background, how it was or the relevant standards and why it is being implemented in the public sector. Okay, so today we discuss on the selected MPSAS. As I mentioned in your course outline, that we have MPSAS 1 and 9. I think 1 is already shared in previous class. So 9, 17, and 23, 24, and 32. Okay. Right, let me share the slide. Okay, selected MPSAS. We will look at okay, I think as mentioned here, MPSAS 9, revenue from exchange transactions, and then MPSAS 17, PPE. Of course, I mean, even the PPE, I try to highlight certain elements for financial reporting purposes. That's a bit unique in the case of public sector context. Okay, like infrastructure assets, like heritage assets. Okay. Then MPSAS 23, revenue from non-exchange transactions. Okay, so now you have two types. Okay, MPSAS 9 is revenue from exchange transactions. MPSAS 23, revenue from non-exchange transactions. Okay, so I think we'll discuss, because at this point you're also exposed to types of revenue that generally governments are collecting, or basically they can generate. Okay, so basically the main one will be from non-exchange transactions, but it's also recognized that okay, they also have that possibility of generating revenues from arm's length transactions. All right, and then MPSAS 24, presentation of budget information in financial statement, just to highlight because it's quite unique. And at this point, you know the importance of budget for the government organizations, and then how that also being reported in the annual reports or in the financial statements. Okay, so there's a specific standard, MPSAS 24. And lastly, we discuss on MPSAS 32 on service concession arrangement, okay, for the perspective of grantor. Grantor because the government is basically the grantor, okay, providing the private sector the assets for them to operate. And we'll see, because this also MPSAS 32, I think we discussed on the PFI, Private Finance Initiative. So in a way that these are basically the standards related to PFI, okay, or some assets under procurements. Right, now we move on. Okay, yes, to be discussed. MPSAS 9, revenue from exchange transactions. Okay, I think of course the expectation will be from the services. Revenue includes only the gross inflows of economic benefits, okay, or service potential received and receivable by the entity on its own account. Okay, so you can see that how it is defined. The revenue is defined. Of course, it's about inflow of economic benefits or service potential. Okay, received and receivable. So this is public sector organizations. So not only economic benefits. Okay, that is basically demonstrated or reflected by future cash flow or future cash inflows, but service potential as well. Okay, when they provide services, the assets, the inflows is basically related to service potential. This also trigger to the recognition of revenue. Okay, so it's not necessarily related to future cash inflows. Okay, so you must recognize that. So both are considered, can be considered as a criteria for recognition. In this case, it's basically recognition of revenue. So the inflow of economic benefits and service potential. Right. So service potential, if I think government generally sometimes they receive, donation in terms of for assets that can improve their services. These are examples of service potential. Okay, but for MPSAS-9, revenue is recognized based on trade and exchange transactions. Okay, so I think exchange transaction means it's like, there is buying and selling. Okay, it's an arm's length transactions. Example, income from service provided or rendered, trading goods, interest income, petroleum royalty, dividends, rental, and similar distributions of income resulted from use of asset by other external entities. Right, so use of asset here means definitely the government assets. And I think if you look at in the case of Malaysian government, so pretty much if you talk about royalty or dividends, right, not only from the tax but from dividends, because I think Malaysia is blessed with commodity, right, and definitely one big contribution for government is petroleum income, okay, in the forms of tax, in the forms of dividends, right. So dividend itself definitely as a source of income can be recognized. Okay, as part of the items under revenue from exchange transactions. Right, if you look at the last one, the rendering of services typically involve the performance by the entity of an agreed task over an agreed period of time. Okay, so I think, but if you look at the standards, I think the requirements may not be as strict as in IFRS. Okay, so I think the term like performance obligations is not there. I think a few other terms that you learn from revenue from customers. The 5 criterias. So it's not there in the standards. But I think if you look at this, rendering of services, when they have the agreed tasks, okay, with the parties, okay, the government and the other parties. So at that point, trigger recognition of revenues. So that's why I put a note there close to MPSAS than MFRS. Okay, so I think possibly that's the environment at this point, the practice for the public sector organizations. Okay, and they have that flexibility to recognize the revenue. Right, now we move on to MPSAS-23. Okay, revenue from non-exchange transactions. I think very obvious. So the example is taxes and transfers. Okay, tax and transfers. I think tax collection. Okay, tax revenue, charging tax. I think it's quite obvious. I think you understand. Maybe definitely accounting students, because they take taxation as their subject, that definitely they understand what is tax more than other students. So definitely tax as revenue for the government. In this case, is considered as revenue from non-exchange transactions. Right. The other form is transfers. Shares similar thread where the resource transfer from one entity to another without exchange is similar values and they are not taxes. So example here including grants. Right. I think governments receive grants. Debt forgiveness, I think from time to time you can see that maybe in Malaysia, no recent example of debt forgiveness, but in other countries, okay, particularly the developing countries, or possibly when countries are facing calamity, okay, where they're not in the position to pay their debts, then the lenders, okay, the lenders can provide, basically they can grant debt forgiveness to the country, okay, or to the government of the countries. I think, if I'm not mistaken, partly Greece, okay, when Greece was very bad financially, okay, it was in the brink of bankruptcy, yeah, a government facing that situation. I think there was an arrangement of debt forgiveness by the lenders. Okay, but definitely loans between countries. Right, another fine. Okay, there's kind of so many fine and fees within the. Now I think COVID-related fine. There are so many and become news in the media. Okay, so simple example. Recently, there are a few traders or entrepreneurs. They were fined up to 50,000 because of COVID violations. That triggers so many. Became viral or something, all right? Or donations, okay, in kind, cash, goods or services, as you can see that, that trigger recognition of revenue. Okay, so government receive donations. I think this is also very common nowadays, okay, particularly during COVID time, during crisis time, where countries which has more surplus, okay, they are in a better position to provide assistance. They will give donations. I think donations nowadays is interesting in the sense that not only they give in the form of money, but they also give in the form of, items related to COVID. Can you give one simple example or quick example of donations during COVID time? Anyone, class? Anyone would like to share? Government to government, companies to government,
Test kits.
Test kits, okay, for the COVID test. Other one more? Vaccine, right? I think there are countries providing vaccines to other. I think vaccine now is the main what do you call it? Goods, countries, particularly those many countries with have that manufacturing capabilities. They somehow try to get control of the supply. I think the Europeans, the Americans, but at the same time they also provide supplies to related countries. On top of because various different countries, they have different supply and arrangement. I think in our case, we now apparently more because of that arrangement with Sinovac through Parma-Niaga. Okay, so I think apparently it looks like the main supply at this point is Sinovac. Okay, because they have that local assembly, local production. Okay, with the alliance or cooperation between Sinovac and Parma-Niaga. Of course, the others is Pfizer and others, including AstraZeneca. Right. So you can expect that donations, and if the government receive that donations, they should recognize that as revenue. Okay, may recognize asset, revenue, and liability. In the non-exchange transactions, an entity either receive value from another entity without directly giving approximately equal value in exchange, or give value to another entity without directly receiving approximately equal value in exchange. Okay, so there is an element of transfer. This also can be considered as revenue. Right, now we move on to recognition. An entity will recognize an asset arising from non-exchange transactions. Okay, so either it is in the form of donations, cash, when it gains control of resources that meet the definition of an asset and satisfy the recognition criteria. Okay, so control is one of the main criteria beside the inflows and others. An inflow of resources from a non-exchange transaction other than services in kind that meets the definition of an asset shall be recognized as an asset when and only when, okay, so there's an emphasis there, it is probable that the future economic benefits or service potential, okay, associated with the asset will flow to the entity and the fair value of the asset can be measured reliably. Okay, there are two criteria there. Okay, I think control is the main criteria, and then on top of that, there is an inflow of economic benefits and service potential. Okay, so I think you take note of that. So I think in financial accounting in the private sector, the focus is always future economic benefits. But when this accounting standard applies in the public sector, so they add service potential. Okay, so take note of that. And okay, beside that, the inflow of the future benefits, okay, the fair value can also be measured. Okay, an inflow of resources from a non-exchange transaction recognized as an asset shall be recognized as revenue. Okay, so the corresponding entry will be the revenue, except to the extent that a liability is also recognized in respect of the same inflow. Okay, so asset is recognized, but the corresponding entries can be revenue as well as a liability. As an entity satisfies a present obligation recognized as a liability in respect of an inflow of resources from a non-exchange transaction recognized as an asset, shall reduce the carrying amount of the liability recognized and recognize an amount of revenue equal to that reduction. Okay, so when the liability is reduced, so the corresponding is also the recognition of the revenue. Right, so that is recognition. Now we move on to the measurement. Okay, revenue from non-exchange transactions shall be measured at the amount of the increase in net asset recognized by the entity. Okay, so you can see that we have to basically calculate the net impact on the net asset. Okay, then that's the amount of the revenue. When as a result of a non-exchange transaction, an entity recognized an asset is also recognized revenue equivalent to the amount of the asset measured in accordance with, of course, these are the requirements of the fair value. Okay, if you look at the bottom there, the example for this MPSAS-23 in the manual is on the page 189. Because I also provide a copy of the manual, that demonstrates how this standard been applied. And this manual is provided by the AG. Okay, so you can check for the MPSAS-23, page 189. I think if you have the time, either today or the following class, we'll discuss on the examples in the manual, how the standards have been, the relevant entries and others to demonstrate how to apply these standards. Okay, so MPSAS-24, presentation of budget information. Okay, I think these are highlights because I think at this point quite comfortable. We understand what is budget information. So there are budget allocation as well as the actual expenditures. So these are being presented. So and I think that definitely highlights the importance of budget for government entity. For private sector, they don't normally share this. I don't think I ever seen that they share the budget information in the annual reports or in the financial reports. And then they shall present a comparison of the budget amount for which it held publicly accountable and actual amount. So you can see that this is basically the public money, the budget that they use. Okay, as part of public money being allocated to the agency or to the entity. So these are the amount that they're going to report, okay, in the financial statement, either as a separate additional financial statement or as additional budget column in the financial statement currently presented in accordance with MPSAS. Okay, so the two information is a budget and actual amount, kind of expected. So what is the allocation in terms of budget and what is the actual expenditure? So these two pieces of information are presented. Okay. And so these are the original and final budget amount, the actual amount on a comparable basis, and then the notes, okay, should be presented as required by MPSAS-24. Okay, these are example how to present this. These are in the manual, page 24. Right, so you can see that I think the item can be both receipt and expenditure, but these are the column, budgeted amount, they have original and then final, and then actual amount on comparable basis. Okay, so I think original definitely when they first what do you call it, approve, and then final, because from time to time there's always changes if there is needed. That and also definitely the parliament allows those changes. And then they have final amount, and the corresponding amount will be the actual expenditures. And they also show the column difference, final budget and actual. So it's like what is the term used normally if you budget and actual are different? So in costing normally we use what term to show the difference? Here they call it difference between final budget and actual. So in costing we call it, anyone in the class? Are you with me, class?
Yes,
Hello?
sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah, so what do you call it this? Difference between budget and actual. In costing. Huh? Anyone remember?
Is it variance, sir?
Sorry?
Is it variance, sir?
Yes, variance. Okay. I think but variance possibly a bit more technical. So they use difference between final budget and actual. Okay, but it's basically variance. But of course, these are variance on the and that the direct comparison. I think the mean amount. So of course you don't analyze the variance. Okay, so not at that level. Okay, so it's just that comparing between the budget and the actual. Okay, so that is MPSAS-24. Now we move on to MPSAS-17 for PPE. Right, so beside we discuss the scope and also criteria for recognition and measurement. We also highlight heritage asset and infrastructure assets. Okay, including I think military asset and others. Quite unique in the case of government assets. Right, so the scope for MPSAS-17, the standard applies to property, plant and equipment, including specialist military equipment, right? So I think military equipment, I think in the whole country only government can claim that they have military equipment, isn't it? Okay, so if other entities claiming their military equipment can land them into trouble. Okay, because you don't have, and of course, I mean, except if they are manufacturing or producer of those equipment and selling this to the government. Okay, but holding them without the license can be problematic. All right, so specialist military equipment. Second, infrastructure assets, right? So this is also very unique to the government. I think example of infrastructure asset that you can quickly recognize is road networks, sewerage, electricity lines. Okay, and not only that, this also covers service concession assets. Service concession assets. Of course, I mean if the asset depending on the standards. Here is IPSAS 32. In the case of Malaysia, is MPSAS 32. Service concession arrangement. So if the service concession arrangement, or I mean the standards give rise, the arrangement, the PFI arrangement give rise to concession asset, then the treatment of the accounting treatment follow the PPE. On the assets by itself. Okay. Of course, there are other accounting entries and criteria for service concession. That's why they have a separate standards. All right, the cost of an item, I think this is the measurement. Okay, the cost of an item or PPE shall be recognized as an asset only if it is probable that future economic benefits or service potential will flow to the entity. Okay, I think you can see that. So similar pattern about future economic benefits and service potential. And the cost or fair value, okay, of the item can be measured. I think two are considered here. Okay, not only the cost can be the purchase price and related cost to make sure for installation to make sure that the asset or the PPE can start be used, and also fair value. Okay. Sometimes if the cost is not there, okay, couldn't be determined because simply the asset being donated. Okay, so the use of fair value other than the purchase price. Okay, so service potential indicates the capacity of an asset to provide goods and services in accordance with an entity objective without necessarily generating any cash inflow. Okay, so that's the key why service potential is considered as part of the criteria to recognize assets here. So you can see that if you look at the first criteria, that future economic benefits or service potential, it is not and. Okay, so either one. Okay, either one can justify recognition of the assets. This is due to many of the assets and liabilities of entities within the public sector are acquired or incurred as a result of the entity's service delivery mandate. Okay, for example, heritage asset and parks maintained for public access. Okay, so that's why service potential is there. Right. Before I move on to measurement, any questions so far, class? No questions. You can PM me also. If you have question, you put in the WhatsApp. And let me see. All right. Very quiet. Oh, no questions. All right, no problem. Okay, now we move on. Measurement and recognition. Right. So an item or PPE that qualify for recognition as an asset shall be measured at cost. I mean generally, right? Where asset is acquired through a non-exchange transaction, its cost shall be measured at fair value at the date of acquisition. So it can kind of expected. But if you don't have the information on the cost, then you can use the fair value other than the cost of the assets. An item of PPE may be acquired through a non-exchange transaction. For example, land may be contributed to a local government by a developer at no or nominal considerations to enable the local government to develop parks, roads, and paths in the development. Okay, I think land contributed to local government is quite a lot. Because if you look at all developments, okay, housing developments or property developments, they always have roads and also areas that they for utilities, for water pipe, okay, for sewage, for electricity, okay, and for the roads. Okay, all these basically the developers or the owner who are basically managing the development, the property, the land development. Okay, this part of land will be basically contributed to the local government for them, and because then they can manage. The local government can manage directly for them to build the roads, to install the electricity lines and others. Okay. So for the local government, this is they have to basically they recognize they can recognize asset for this as part of PPE. An asset may also be acquired through a non-exchange transactions by the exercise of power of sequestration. Okay, seizure for the state. I think in this case, sometimes there is a need of development. If you look at, I think particularly for the roads or highways and expressway, sometimes they need to take take over some of the assets and lands, basically land areas. Okay, so forced it's like forced sale or forced purchase. But generally, government, when they have that this arrangement, because of the needs of the development, okay, so generally they will buy, they will purchase at market value. I think, and generally, I think the public will cooperate. If there are certain disputes, I think they will resolve. Okay, there are so many examples. I think KL area. Okay, if you look at in Pekeliling area, okay, there are sometimes squatters and others. And if you look at MRR2, Middle Ring Road 2, okay, so and even if you look at Duke, I think there are what do you call it, takeover of lands from the they have to shift the entire neighborhood to basically give way for the development for the expressway. Right, so these well, of course, in that sense, they do compensate, but here they consider that as non-exchange transactions. I'll just give you an example. Under these circumstances, the cost of the item is at fair value at the date it is acquired. I think definitely if this when they take basically take over the asset, they don't pay they don't compensate at the fair value. Then okay, it sounds like it's a non-exchange transactions. But generally, what we understood, government, when they take over, they will compensate the owner at fair value. Okay. Right, now we move on to measurement after recognition. An entity shall choose either the cost model or the valuation model. I think this is very similar to the PPE in MFRS. Okay, either you take a cost model or evaluation model. Okay. I think it's quite similar in terms of the accounting treatment. Okay. Right. In terms of for evaluation, okay, in terms of frequency, to make sure the difference between the carrying amount and the fair value shouldn't be big. Okay. So they can use appraisal, okay, to make sure that to determine the fair value. And so you can see clearly the use of valuation profession or professional valuation professionals or valuer, you call it. I think Malaysia we generally say, okay, we engage valuers, okay, to determine the value, the market value, or the fair value of the properties. Right? Of course, it's not cheap. Okay, it's quite expensive. That's why sometimes the government a bit reluctant. They want to use these valuation services. But of course, I mean, if it is needed, then they can engage. Okay, so whatever the fair value given, but the fair value, you must remember, government assets sometimes very specific and very unique. Okay, so sometimes requires a certain experts, certain expert for certain industry, valuer of the properties for certain industry. I think that they have that. It cannot be a general valuer. Okay, so if you look at, for instance, a very unique assets. Okay, how to value Museum Negara. Okay, for instance. Okay, or in Malaysia, I think we have few heritage assets like Sultan Abdul Samad building. Okay, so how to value this facility or this building, right? Or the High Court building, right? All these historical buildings. So how to develop the valuation. Okay, that's one. The other is if you look at a very unique assets for specific industry, particularly for the government-owned companies. Because in Malaysia we have petroleum companies, okay, which is owned by the government. Or maybe another asset, definitely a water asset. Okay, water pipes that is crossing from north to south. Of course, water is under the jurisdiction of the state, but water asset is federal asset. Okay, so how to put value in that because they're so unique. Okay, that's one. The other is that's why sometimes if I think in the industry they have a special valuer for plantation, for instance, biological assets. Okay, so who can provide value? Definitely the people are from the plantation industry. They know how to value points that's possibly if we we can use a discounted cash flows and others, okay, as a to determine the fair value. So how to estimate the cash flow? All these need a specific expertise, the understanding of the industry. Okay, then they can value it properly. Right. Okay, measurement after recognition. For many assets, the fair value will be readily ascertainable by reference to quoted price in the active and liquid market. For example, current market price can usually be obtained for land, non-specialized buildings, motor vehicles, and many types of plant and equipment. For some public sector assets, it may be difficult to establish their market value because of absence of market. Okay. I think another example is a parliament building. Okay, I understand. Every country have parliament building, isn't it? So, and very unique, one building only. Okay, if you look at Malaysia, we have parliament building. So how to value parliament building? Okay, so huge challenges. For some public sector assets, it may be difficult to establish their market value because of the absence of market transactions for this asset. So there's a guidance. Some public sector entities may have significant holding of such asset. If no evidence is available to determine the market value in the active and liquid market of an item of property, the fair value of the item may be established by reference to other items with similar characteristics in similar circumstances and location. Okay, I think this one is if it is housing property or office property. Okay, possibly they have that reference. For example, the fair value of vacant government land has been held for a long period, during which time there have been few transactions, may be estimated by reference to the market value of land with similar features and topography in a similar location for which market evidence is available. Okay, I think land is possible. In many cases, the depreciation replacement cost of an asset can be established by reference to the buying price of similar asset with similar remaining service potential in active and liquid market. Okay, that's one option. But there is another option here. In some cases, an asset reproduction cost will be the best indicator of its replacement cost. Okay, for example, in the event of loss, a parliament building may be reproduced rather than replaced with alternative accommodation because of its significance to the community. Okay, so because the parliament building is so unique, okay, instead of using the market value, so they can use reproduction costs as a basis to reckon for the measurement. I think that is possible. I think if they, I think maybe in the because they can basically the design is there based on the design, and then the requirements. If they make a comparable, it's good if they have all the records. Okay, the bill of quantity, the type of building that they want. Definitely they can estimate the reproduction cost. I think for estimating the building, we have these QS, quantity surveyors. They can definitely done their job very well, okay, to estimate the cost of the buildings. Right, now classes of PPE, land. Okay, these are classes that is mentioned in the standards for the PPE for MPSAS. Okay, land, operational buildings, roads, machinery, electricity transmission network, ships, aircraft, specialist military equipments, motor vehicle, furniture and fitting, office equipment, and oil rigs. So you can see that some of the items are not common for private sector. Okay, like aircraft, okay, specialized military equipment, okay, electricity transmission networks, oil rigs, right? And so you can see that definitely, okay, it looks like also these are at the whole government level. Okay, rather, okay, at the agency level, possibly they have one item at a time, but when you have that consolidation, so you can have all these types in the consolidated function statements. Right, so these are example of BP. What is in the left? What photo is that, class? On the left, on the right?
Bridge.
Anyone? Bridge on the right. So on the left is what?
Oil rig.
oil rig. Okay, interesting, huh? So if it is oil rig, but yeah, definitely, if you talk about consolidation, because Petronas is statutory body, right? So definitely can be consolidated to the government financial statements. So oil rig, okay, will be in there. If it is accrual, you can expect that oil rigs should be presented in the PPE. Yeah. Okay. Even the companies, as long as it's owned by statutory bodies, they owned by the government, should be consolidated. Definitely. Right now, we move on to another type of asset in the government. They call it heritage assets. Okay. Some assets are described as heritage assets because of their cultural, environmental, or historical significance. Examples of heritage assets include historical buildings and monuments, archaeological sites, conservation areas, and nature reserve and works of art. I think in Malaysia, you can expect that, okay, we have buildings, definitely, monuments, archaeological sites, okay, works of art, maybe not, yeah, possible, okay, is there, okay, maybe, okay, I think last time we have this craze, isn't it, Taming Sari. So who owned Taming Sari? Claim to own the the craze Taming Sari. Anyone familiar with the word, with the craze Taming Sari?
Belongs to Hang
Right.
Suasa.
Yes, but it is mentioned that the craze is still around. Will you consider that as what? Work of arts, right? So historical artifacts. Maybe in the other part, I think possibly different countries have different emphasis. Maybe possibly in the, I think if you look at works of art, generally we understood it coming from European areas. Okay, Picasso and others, okay? But in our areas, possibly we have more of our other items. Okay, look at, I think for international students, you have in your own country, so what will be the historical asset that can meet the criteria of heritage assets. Okay, so heritage asset can be part of the reporting, okay, because of their because of their you look at this, cultural, environmental, or historical significance can be reported in the annual reports. Okay, certain characteristics including the following are often displayed by heritage asset. Their value in cultural, environmental, educational, historical terms is unlikely to be fully reflected in the financial value based purely on the market price. Okay, and then legal and statutory obligations may impose prohibitions or severe restrictions on disposal by sale. Okay, right. Number three, they are often irreplaceable and their value may increase over time, even if their physical conditions deteriorates. So I think three is quite easy to understand, because all these heritage assets, okay, something that you want to share with the future generations, okay, that basically reflecting the country, whatever country you're coming from, of your heritage. And lastly, it may be difficult to estimate the useful life. In some cases, it could be several hundreds of years. Can be thousands of years also. I think if you look at our, because these are old areas, we are old civilizations. The Asians, the Middle East, okay, the South Americans, okay, the Africans, continents. We are all very old civilizations, okay. I mean, we just focus on Southeast Asia, okay. We are the civilizations in this place are thousands of years, okay, and then being improved and enhanced by the coming of Islam, right? So make this place a better place. So these are the dimensions of how we see our civilizations. And even if you want to understand the the current development, I think we have to look at our heritage as well. to understand how things are happening. Okay, public sector entities may have large holdings of heritage assets. They have been acquired over many years by various means, including purchase, donation, bequest, and sequestration. These assets are rarely held for their ability to generate cash inflow, and there may be legal or social obstacle to using them for such purpose. Okay, right. So these are masjid, masjid Jami'. Right. Some heritage assets have future economic benefits or service potential other than the heritage value. For example, an historic building being used for office accommodation. Right. I think in Malaysia we can see this. You know, like railway, yeah, KTM. If you look at KTM buildings in KL, so basically they are resided in the very old buildings. Okay, so definitely it's historical buildings. In these cases, they may be recognized and measured on the same basis as other PPE. For other heritage assets, their future economic benefit or service potential is limited to their heritage characteristics. For example, monuments and ruins, the existence of both future economic benefits and service potential can affect the choice of measurement base. Right, so I think the organization or the entity have to decide, okay, to develop the accounting policy. If they are holding or if they have this heritage asset under their custody, under their management, so they have to decide. So what would be the relevant accounting policy for them to report? So heritage asset shall be recorded if it is gazetted under National Heritage Asset. I think this one is, yeah. If cost, this one is from Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken. If cost is available, it shall be measured at cost. If it is impractical to determine the cost, it should be measured at nominal cost of RM1. Okay. Entities that recognize heritage asset are required to disclose in respect of those assets such matters, for example, the measurement basis, depreciation method, gross carrying amount. I think just like the PPE. Yeah? So you can see that it's also possible. Okay, if they have the cost. Otherwise, if it is impractical, then it's a matter of disclosure, but the cost is a nominal cost, right, RM1. So instead of showing at the what do you call it, the face of financial statement, so it's more on the focus will be on the disclosure. Right, now we move on to infrastructure assets. Okay, some assets are commonly described as infrastructure assets, but there is no universally accepted definition. Okay, if you look at this example, infrastructure asset can be considered if they are part of a system or a network. They are specialized in nature and do not have alternative use. Okay, I think that's a characteristics of infrastructure asset. They are immovable. Okay, that's another characteristics. Okay, and they may be subject to constraint on disposal. Okay, so generally I think we understand about the network of roads. Although ownership of infrastructure asset is not confined to entities in the public sector, significant infrastructure assets are frequently found in the public sector. Infrastructure assets meet the definition of PPE and should be accounted for in accordance with the standards. Example of infrastructure asset include road networks, sewer system, water and power supply system, and communication network. Okay, so basically all these requires normally development expenditures. So all these, so this can be categorized as infrastructure assets. Right, another asset on third-party land. Right, I think this is an issue. Okay, Section 5 National Land Code, government buildings sitting on third-party land should not be accounted for as PPE, as federal government of Malaysia is not the landowner. However, government buildings sitting on third-party land can be accounted for as PPE if ownership or control over the building can be demonstrated under the following circumstances. Okay, so the requirement of the standards, so ownership or control, either one. Okay, so how to demonstrate ownership or control? Formal agreement or lease arrangement with the landowner that give the government the right to control and the right to use the building for a specific period of time. Control given by a legal stature that this also another because of the mandate that give the government the right to control, use and use the building. Okay, So with that, then PPE can be recognized. Right, you can see also disclosure. These are all disclosure requirements. Okay, I think you can read that. So it's following, if you look at, that's why MPSAS is following IFRS. You can see that revaluation, impairments, okay? And definitely, but investment property, I think there is investment property, okay? But the word impairment, losses, all these are basically termed under MFRS. All right, so lastly, MPSAS-32, service concession and arrangement for grantor, okay? I think I keep this for the next class, for MPSAS-32. Then with that also we'll go through the manual, okay? I think that, so that you can see, rather than I just go through quickly. It's quite difficult to follow. All right, I think 1 hour. Any question? Any question, class? Happy, very happy. You still in Hari Raya mode? Oh, finish already.
No.
No. Oh, but be careful lah. Now, COVID is not good. The COVID environment. So if you can stay home, stay home. Okay, keep your health. Look after your health properly. Okay. Any comment? All right. Just a quick reminder. Since I think just end the presentation. Since what do you call it? Okay, tomorrow. Just quick. I think for your assignment 2, right? And if no questions, then I will end. I will end this with wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.